welcome. My guests tonight include the woman described as pop's ultimate princess. She is Posh Spice, also known as Victoria Beckham. Then there's the surviving half of what was television's best double act since Morecambe and Wise. I speak of two fat ladies and the extraordinary Clarissa Dickson Wright. Now, my first guest is one of our most engaging and talented entertainers. He's a writer, director and performer, best known for hosting Room 101 and making Angus Dayton's life a misery on Have I Got News For You. Ladies and gentlemen, big welcome, Paul Merton. Welcome. It's strange when you do research on people, the odd facts you find out about them. I found out, reading about you, that you didn't have your first date until you were 24.
Yes, that's a polite way of putting it. But shortly after my first date, I had another one about 20 minutes later. Because when you're that age, you can. There was one night I had about 4 or 5 dates in a row. You wouldn't believe it, would you?
No, but there's a serious line of inquiry here.
Yes.
I mean, at 24 years of age, before you have your first date
yes.
with a member of the opposite sex.
Yes.
I mean, it argues for a kind of a strange situation.
Yes, yes. Well, it was sort of, I think when I was on your show previously, I noticed I'm not in the title sequence there. But anyway,
after tonight, I promise you.
Well, I noticed after the last time I was on your show, I mentioned about being sent to Coventry at school when sort of people I knew about sort of 6 or 7 people, and they stopped talking to me. And so consequently, I didn't really know anybody. So I worked in the civil service for a while, and I had this desire to become a comedian. But me and a friend of mine, I sort of roped in on this ambition. John, we moved into this masonette, this ground floor masonette in West Norwood, but we didn't know anybody. I had no friends from work, I had no friends from school. So consequently, John used to say to me, well, when are we going to meet some women? And I said, well, unless we find some in the kitchen. We had no money, we had no friends, we wore sort of like terrible sort of army greatcoats and stuff. So it was, we had no visitors. About 6 months into living there was a knock at the door and we were so excited. And it was Jehovah's Witnesses. I could have throttled them.
Didn't you have a phone?
No, we didn't bother with a phone because, again, there was, you know, our parents had sort of seemed to disown us or whatever. But no, that wasn't true. If Mary and Albert are watching, it's not true. But if they're not watching, it is true. But no, we were sort of like tramps with a house.
You're broke.
Yeah, we were broke. We were signing on and just eating these terrible meals. And we had a coal fire, but no coals. We had the sort of, you know, the makings of a coal fire. And I remember one day. We was very, very cold one evening, and we got one of the floorboards off the floor, and we started pushing it into the fire. I was sitting on the sofa, slowly pushing this floorboard in, and it was getting colder because we'd taken the floorboards up. So it was a very bizarre existence, certainly.
So, all right. So there you were, this reclusive couple, sitting in this house, burning the floorboards from underneath you. But then, how do you get to that to meet a girl? From that situation?
Well, I was lucky. I met somebody who was deaf, because I was very, very shy, so I was no good at sort of talking to people. You know, talking to the man in the shop was, you know, didn't mind talking to a woman was an ordeal. And I was at a music club, a friend of mine had taken me to, and one friend we did have. And there was this girl sitting there, and she wrote this note over to me that said, "Do you come here often?" Which I thought was quite funny, so I wrote back something. And then we sort of exchanged these notes, and then we sort of exchanged letters for a couple of weeks, and then we met up. And then when I met up, I found out that she was deaf, and that's why she hadn't said something to me. She was writing it across. But for her writing it...
Profoundly deaf, was she?
Yes, she was, yes. She had 2 hearing aids in and stuff, and really was very badly deaf. So, but for that, I was probably still be in West Norwood.
Well, what's interesting about you, I mean, I've met many people on this show, actors particularly, who are shy. And I can see, I don't think there's anything strange about them going on stage because, in a sense, acting, you disguise yourself, and you can see that would be the perfect place to hide for somebody who was shy. I've met very few comics, if one at all. You're probably the first who was shy, because, see, a comedian can't hide. A comedian is naked when he stands on the stage. And it's very...
You've seen the act.
But it is a paradox, isn't it? It's a very strange... paradox, this.
I suppose so, yes. I suppose it is, because but it was, the shyness was mixed with the burning ambition, and that sort of meant I actually didn't do anything about the burning ambition because I was too shy, but I still had this burning ambition. Eventually I managed to, just through sheer sort of courage, I suppose, I'd phoned up the Comedy Store and I heard you could go on late at night and do 5 minutes, and so that's what I did. And that first step onto a stage, and when I went there, I was expecting like a theatre with proper seats and stuff, and it was like a bear pit. It was a room full of tables with beers on the table. It was a late night drinking club that also had comedy really going on. So getting through that first step was an enormous step to take, and I still remember that sort of step onto the stage. It was like stepping out of an aeroplane. You know, it felt, you know, you had to trust that the parachute was working, or that you hadn't packed it yourself, you know, and you didn't know if you had a parachute on either. So you're just trying out to see what would happen. But I knew that if I didn't try, if I really didn't give it a go, then that would be the most depressing thing of all. I'd go back to the civil service, and I would have always been the person in my mind that never had the nerve to even fail.
You've also, I mean, now you've come to the point in your life where you've actually embraced all of showbiz. I mean, the ultimate is when you do pantomime.
Yes.
And only icons do pantomime.
Yes.
And you did pantomime this year for the first time, didn't you?
Yes, we did it. We did the ITV pantomime. They wanted me to be an ugly sister, and I said, well, let's have Ronnie Corbett as the other ugly sister and make us identical, and that nobody can tell us apart. So it didn't really happen in the finished script, but the idea was that people would come on and say, well, which one are you? We look alike. You couldn't tell the difference. There was all that going on, but it is I mean, to do it like that, to do it as a one-off and playing drag and stuff. There's a good story about, there was an older music hall act called Old Mother Riley, a guy called Arthur Lucan. Who,
wonderful. Kitty McShane.
Kitty McShane
Daughter
as well.
Kitty.
Exactly.
Yes. There you go.
You've changed the tune.
No, I just...
But he was sort of, I don't know if this story is true or not, but apparently he was in a pantomime in the mid-50s, and he was playing Old Mother Riley and playing the pantomime Dame. And there was a terrible commotion in the dressing room at the interval, and he had a heart attack, he had a fatal heart attack, and died. And they're going, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to... The manager was called. The manager, what's the matter? Old Mother Riley. Oh, my God, what are we going to do? He thought, well, I've got to go and tell the audience. I'll have to tell the audience that nobody could replace him because there was no understudy. So he goes out to the interval, and he walks out in front of the curtains, and he says to the audience, says, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I've got some very bad news. I'm afraid Old Mother Riley has just died. And the audience went, oh, no, she hasn't. I heard a good story the other day.
That ought to be true.
It should be true. It should be true. I heard a good David Bowie story the other day. He was playing a working man's club. You know when he used to do Ziggy Stardust, and he used to have all the makeup on and the sort of thigh-length boots and the hot pants and all that sort of stuff. Early 70s, and he was doing a warm-up gig in a working man's club somewhere. And I don't know why he was doing this, but he was. And he was backstage, he was about to go on with his band, and he suddenly realised he wants to go to the loo, and there's the manager of the club walking around, you know. And David Bowie said, oh, excuse me, where's the loo? And the bloke looks at him, and he says, there, down there, there's the loo, down there. And he points down this corridor, and there's this dirty old sink at the end, you know. He said, that's your loo there. All brown and horrible, you know, really terrible. And David Bowie says, excuse me, he said, I'm not using that. You know who I am? I'm not using that. And he says, listen, son, he said, if it's good enough for Shirley Bassey, it's good enough for you.
I want it to be true, you see. I want it to be true, all of them.
I mean, I don't know. It probably isn't, but...
It doesn't matter. It's not.
It probably wasn't good enough for Shirley Bassey. She brings her own bucket. She's a big star.
Link line. Yeah. What about this?
Well, it's not so noisy that way, is it?
The last time we did the show was before you'd started Room 101.
Yes, yeah.
And it seemed to me that show kind of fitted you like a glove. You stepped into it and enjoyed it.
Yes, it was good fun, and we're doing another series shortly. Yes, well, this I think was a legacy from the civil service, because at the civil service I used to interview people every day, and you know I was taught by the civil service how to interview and stuff, and so it wasn't. And I watched what you did, and I thought, well, I'm not doing that. No, but there are little things like not having the desk there, which I learned from being on this show, which is very good because there is more of a communication going on, all that sort of thing.
It's a barrier. No, there should not be a barrier between.
Exactly,
yes.
and listening to what people are saying.
Well, that's the problem. That's difficult, isn't it?
Pardon?
Exactly. But let me ask you, therefore, the question as the host of 101, and if you're a guest on 101, just give me one person and one thing that you would consign to the dustbin.
Room 101, let me see. Opera, I think. Opera I'd certainly put in.
Opera?
Yeah.
Opera, not Oprah Winfrey.
No, not Oprah Winfrey.
Opera.
Opera.
Yes.
It strikes me, it's been going 200 years and it still hasn't caught on. It really isn't. There's a few people go and see it, and it's very expensive, but the rest of us don't bother. You know, the fat woman who's dying of consumption, you know, she's... she's only been given 7 years to live, you know. And the person I would put in, if you're a person, would you like me to put a person?
Yes, I would, please.
Noel Edmonds.
Popular choice.
It's just that I was glued to his show last year, what was it, the rubber bottom, crinkly bottom thing, whatever it's called. And I just think the way he treats people, members of the audience, I just think it's terrible. He'd sort of like spray red all over them. There was one sequence where he'd hidden a camera in somebody's loo, and it was just excruciating. And when he's got somebody famous on, he's fawning all over them, showing his non-comedic skills. But when he's got a member of the public on, he treats them like morons.
I take it he's not a guest on the forthcoming series.
Well, no.
And now, because you've got this wonderful situation now, because you've got 2 successful shows. Have I Got News for You goes on strength to strength. Do you ever get bored with that show?
No, not really, because you have different guests on every week on Have I Got News for You, so when you've got a good guest, it really sort of gives it a lift. It's a very hard show to do.
Yeah, I bet.
It's very difficult for me because I'm trying to sort of find jokes in there, and Angus is sort of, you know, he's concentrating on his stuff, and Ian's sort of opposing me. Sometimes you feel like you're trying to get a laugh in a coroner's court, you know, when they look at you. But, you know, you say something amusing, and Angus says, in what way, you know? Oh, I don't know, whatever. You know. Ian gets very annoyed. The back of his head starts glowing red, and you know.
It's wonderful casting, you see. That's why.
Yes, it is.
It's
yeah,
marvellous.
It is.
And the longer it goes on, the more the roles get defined, and the more.
I suppose so. And the raw material is constantly changing because it's based on the news. So there is no reason why it shouldn't last another week.
At least. And of course, you had my next guest you had on there famously and spectacularly on the show.
Yes,
making allegations, but we won't repeat the allegations.
No, we can't.
No, we can't. I mean, and they were untrue to start with. But
absolutely.
It was a memorable show. So we look forward to reuniting and not discussing that which we talked about.
Exactly.
But for the moment, Paul Merton, thank you very much indeed.
You.
Paul Merton. Television's most remarkable double act, Two Fat Ladies, came to a sad end recently with the death of Jennifer Patterson. The surviving half is a woman who's led a life so vivid it has publishers drooling over the prospect of her autobiography. Here are a few chapters. She was born into a wealthy background, a house with servants and all that. She inherited £1 million and boozed it all away. In her time, she'd been a barrister, a pheasant farmer, and a cook. And then, as an overweight middle-aged woman, she became a worldwide celebrity. Ladies and gentlemen, Clarissa Dickson Wright. Welcome. Just before I talk to you about your life, a word about Jennifer. It must have been a terrible shock to you.
A most awful shock. I mean, nobody had any idea.
No.
There we were, we'd been filming but 3 weeks before with Jennifer. We had to drag her away from the elephants because we were filming with elephants and she was rather fond of them. And no sign that there was anything wrong with her. And then it all happened terribly quickly, but she died wonderfully and beautifully. She was a great inspiration to everybody.
In what sense did she die wonderfully and beautifully?
Well, she was a very, very devout Catholic, and she had the last rites, and she believed very firmly that she'd done her bit, and now she could have the party to see her out. And all her friends went to the hospital, endless caviar, endless champagne, and I mean, there's that wonderful story of the Macmillan nurse who said, "Are you feeling better today, dear?" And she said, "Don't be silly, I'm dying." I mean, wonderful.
She was, but you both are, would you agree, eccentrics?
No, Jennifer was eccentric. I would agree that Jennifer was eccentric.
But not you?
No, certainly not. I'm perfectly normal and every day.
Perfectly not. Well, I mean, your stories, I just hinted at in the introduction, is far from ordinary at all. And, I mean, I mentioned there about people, publishers, drooling over the prospect of your autobiography. And I know that, in fact, you're keeping that for another day, aren't you?
That's my pension.
That's your pension.
Anyway,
exactly.
Not enough people have died yet.
No, well, that would be a problem. But I wondered, because I mentioned the time when you were an alcoholic, I mean, would you have to do, when you write your book, like Geoffrey Bernard did, and put an advert in the Times saying, anybody who remembers what I did between the years of 72 and 82, please write and tell me?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't remember the early 80s at all. When I was about 5 years sober, somebody gave me a book of the early 80s, and I was going, the Pope got shot? Where was I? Well, I know perfectly well where I was. It was either the Antelope, the Duke of Wellington. And I don't remember the Falklands War at all. I was standing in the rain. True, it's absolutely true. I was standing in the rain under an umbrella, and this parade was going by, and I said to this handsome young man who was standing in the audience, probably about 5 miles away, but I always make a beeline for a handsome young man. I said, what is this parade? It's not the Lord Mayor's show, it's the wrong time of year. And he sort of smiled at me, a silly old bag, and said, it's the Falklands parade. And I said, did something happen in the Falklands? And he fled, you can imagine.
We'll come back to that moment in your life in a moment. But let's go back and to that privileged upbringing that I said you had. I mean, I actually saw your father in action, in a sense. He was, apart from being a surgeon, he was a wonderful after-dinner speaker, one of the best. And I remember seeing Arthur Dickson Wright at a couple of dinners that I went to. But he was a very different man when he got home, wasn't it? And that figure that we saw.
Oh, yes. I mean, he was a brilliant surgeon, a brilliant after-dinner speaker, and I would never try to diminish that at all. But he should never have had children. He had a real Saturn complex about his children. He just didn't know how to deal with us. And, he was not a good father.
It was an unhappy background, was it?
A very unhappy. Well, I suppose it was unhappy. I don't really remember that it was unhappy. My father was the only unhappy blot on it. My mother was wonderful. I mean, she was larger than life. She'd sit there with a black eye saying, look, darling, I can still move my hands, isn't it?
She'd been beaten by him?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Really?
But she was, she was always positive. She was... and the other thing was I never saw my father drink. So if my mother hadn't said, remember to duck, darling, Daddy's been drinking, I would just have thought he was insane. Which he was, but because of the alcohol.
Yes, yes. And what about your mother? What about how much a different person was she? What kind of person?
Oh, well, I've never forgotten. My mother was incredibly elegant. Amazingly elegant. Yes, no, they didn't change babies in the hospital, but she was amazingly elegant. And, she had these big china blue eyes, and people adored her. I remember this occasion when she was doing 140 up the M4 in her powder blue Bristol, and she was stopped at Hammersmith by a policeman. And he came over and knocked on the window, and she wound it down, and she smiled at him sweetly and said, "Congratulations, officer, I don't know how you kept up with me." Anyway, and she said, "Have you got a Bristol too?" And he said, "Well, no, madam. We wouldn't have caught up with you if we hadn't slowed down for the flyover." And she said, "Clarissa, darling, show the officer the engine. Men always like to see the engine." So there I found myself with this poor bemused police officer standing in front of the engine of this car, and I said, "Well, she's just like that." And he came back and he said, "It's all right, madam." He said, "I don't think speeding restrictions are for the likes of you." And she said, "I drove ambulances in the war, And he said, "Did they survive?"
And yet, it's, obviously, you're attached to her, and yet all your life was driven, actually, by your father, wasn't it? Because you became a barrister because you knew it would upset him.
Oh, yes, my father hated lawyers, and I hated my father. So this, like any good alcoholic, seemed to be the perfect reason for choosing my life's career. I'd never met a barrister. I mean, I just about knew what barristers did because I hadn't seen it on television because they didn't have those sort of programmes in those days. But I had been sat at the back of the court by a friend of mine's father who was taking me to the train, so I knew they wore sort of fancy wigs and things. But I just did it to annoy my father, who was desperate for me to go into medicine. I mean, what a terrifying thought. Think how many people I could have killed.
There are several stories about your father too, of course. I mean, not about his drinking and his bad behaviour, but about his what should we say, his tactics, his business acumen, and when he had people on the table, on the slab in front of him.
Oh, he was totally ruthless. He adored rugby. I mean, rugby was his great thing. He was the man who turned St Mary's Paddington into a rugby hospital. And there was this wonderful moment when Lord Beaverbrook was waiting to have an operation, and my father went in on the morning of the operation, and Beaverbrook said, how are you, Dickie? Feeling totally confident? And he said, no, look. He said, so worried. He said, where are my poor boys going to play rugby this winter? He said, I can't concentrate at all. My hand won't stop shaking. And Beaverbrook looked rather grey and said, well, if I survive the operation, you can have that piece of land you're after at Teddington. And he said, well, why don't you sign now? And then if you survive the operation, you can pay for the pavilion. And he did.
What was it then that led to your drinking? Because until you were, about 25, you didn't drink at all, did you?
No, that's right. Well, I suppose what was the trigger for me was that my mother died. I didn't want to be an alcoholic like so many other members of my family, so I didn't drink. And then my mother died, and it was really a pain I couldn't handle. And I remember going round to a friend's flat that night and sort of, he said, you want a nice cup of tea? And I said, no, I want a large drink, and pouring myself 4 fingers of whiskey and drinking it straight down and really feeling that I'd come home. You know, this was the answer to the universe, and why had I waited all this time? And from there on in, I never looked back, really. Or forward.
But how long were you enslaved by drinkers?
About 12 years.
12 years were you? And at its worst, what were you drinking? Or what was your daily consumption?
Well, I had a habit of 2 bottles of gin a day. That was my habit.
Yeah.
And then I always had towards the end, I had about a third of a bottle of vodka to get me out of bed. And then anything else I could get my hands on, keep down, or stay awake to drink. I mean, I can remember when I used to go and stay with this school friend, and my godchildren would come in and bounce on me in the mornings. And, you know, it was the importance of waking up early enough to have several slugs of alcohol before they came and bounced on me.
But at this time, too, when you had to work?
Oh, yes, I was working. I mean, most alcoholics work, you know. I mean, this picture of the guy in the dirty raincoat on the embankment is very unreal. You know, most alcoholics hold down a job because how else do you pay for the booze? The job's always the last thing to go.
Yes. What was the moment in time when you decided that enough was enough? Or was there a moment in time? Was it a revelation like that? Or was it just a gradual coming together as thinking, I don't want to be like this?
So what happened was I was getting more and more enervated. I had no energy, and I'm a person who has a lot of energy, and more miserable and more unhappy. And I was working in the country, and I couldn't, you know, I didn't even want to go to the pubs anymore, and I was a great pub drinker. And I was down on my knees cleaning the sort of burnt jam off the quarry tiles. And I remember saying, dear God, if you're up there, please do something, because I simply can't go on. And the next day I got arrested. My God has a very melodramatic sense of humour. And there I was, being carried down the drive of the stately home where I was working in the back of this police car as the house party were coming up it for the weekend. You know, and I was going... And from there on in, I was inexorably carried into recovery. I wasn't kicking and screaming because I didn't really know it happened.
But what was the alternative to that? What had you considered where your life was going before that?
Well, I'd rather hope that I was going to die.
You wanted that, didn't
you?
Oh,
yes. Death seemed a very friendly option.
Yes.
And I used to sit there. I mean, I'd sit and look at the bottle and wonder if this was the one that was going to kill me. But little did I know there was actually nothing wrong with me. I've got an incredibly strong constitution. And at one point, I had a shotgun. And I used to sit and look at this shotgun and think, no, not today, and pour myself another gin. And then I sold the shotgun to pay for some more gin, so that was the end of that. But I remember just before I went into Promise, which was the treatment centre I went into, going and staying the night in this bed and breakfast in Pimlico. And I couldn't get drunk. The drink wouldn't work. And I actually remember thinking that I could go to the embankment, because the embankment's a place in your head, really.
Yes.
And it would be so simple, because all I'd have to worry about was where the next drink was going to come from. And I couldn't do it. And so I went down, the next day I went down to the pub to get my copy of Saki, which I'd lent to the publican, and there was this message to ring my brother, and from there on in, the whole thing just opened up.
I suppose that when Paul too, you went to Mosley, didn't you? Mm-hmm. That when people like yourself have put yourself in the situation where you're desperate in a sense, and then you have to rebuild from there. Although one wouldn't want to go through it, I suppose there's a sense in which you're far more aware of yourself than anybody else is around you.
Oh,
That you are stripped down, aren't you?
I mean, you know, if I hadn't been an alcoholic, I'd be a High Court judge. Mark, you
can be both.
I was going to say but I was incredibly arrogant when I was 21. You know, I really thought that if people didn't sort of think the way I thought or didn't agree with what I said, they were either lying or stupid. Mark, you made 21 like that anyway, don't they?
But what about your time in recovery? I mean, was it it is a difficult period. How difficult was it?
Well, I'm still in recovery.
You are?
Oh, yes,
I'm
in recovery forever. I hope.
Yes.
Day at a time. In the beginning, I think I was very lucky. I was au point. I got to the stage where really I'd drunk enough for 3 lifetimes. You know, I'd even sort of eaten the worm in the tequila bottle. And don't recommend it. It's not hallucinogenic, by the way. No. And it's a lie. Mark, by the time you drank the bottle of tequila, you probably wouldn't know anyway.
There may not have been a worm in there.
Good point. You know, so yes, it was difficult, and I had no idea. My life was totally in ruins, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it or what was going to become of me. I mean, I thought that I would go back to the law and be terribly respectable and earn a lot of money, and I went back to the law for a year. And when I walked away from it to go back to the food world, somebody said to me, "Remember, Clarissa, there is neither money nor glamour in cookery."
That's how it's very funny story, isn't it? Because there you were, as I said, middle-aged and overweight, the two of you, two unlikely stars in the world. If you're going to design a couple of stars, you wouldn't have come up with what you came up with. And yet you're hugely successful. Have you ever sort of pondered the reason why?
I think that the attraction was that we were so obviously enjoying ourselves.
Yes.
The food was the sort of food you could cook at home. It's not restaurant food.
Yes.
And contrary to what people say, people do cook our food at home because we wouldn't have sold that many cookery books otherwise. We were totally non-politically correct. And we were just sort of, I don't know, two women of a certain age having an enormous amount of fun and running around on this totally unlikely vehicle.
It was very bizarre, very, very British, and God bless you. I mean, it was wonderful. I think that what it was too about it was like all best television. It was a sense of you really enjoying yourselves. I mean, and there was a sense of it not being scripted or produced. It was very carefully produced, but it had that wonderful feeling of just happening.
But explain this to me. It wasn't scripted, it was totally unscripted.
No.
But explain this to me. Why were we the 4th best-selling book, not cookery book, but book, in Los Angeles? I mean, they had to read it for pornography, didn't they?
I mean, in America, I mean, fat is pornographic, isn't it? I mean, it's a word that you don't utter.
Oh, it's the last taboo. It's the
Yes.
I mean, American journalists used to say, you know, don't you object to the title? And I'd say, which bit? And they'd say, well, you know. And I said, well, there are 2 of us. I mean, ladies does sound rather like a public convenience. But I hope we're ladies. You know, which bit are you talking about? And they get into terrible. Well, you know, the other bit.
And they wouldn't say the word. But it's not only in America, it's Australia too. I mean,
huge, you know, 70% of the Australian viewing audience. And I mean, we got this email. This is the most unlikely thing. We got an email from an Aboriginal tribal reservation. How do you send an email from an Aboriginal tribal reservation? Saying that the old ladies of the tribe loved watching us on television. I mean, how do you get television? And would we please go and cook with them? And it's one of the great sadnesses in my life that we never did, because it would have been wonderful.
That would have been a wonderful, wonderful idea. And what's the future then? I mean, without Jennifer now, I mean, you can't do the 2 fat ladies. Are you going to be in the same business of cooking?
I'm in the middle of making, well, I've just made the first programme of an 8-part series for the BBC. It's not cooking.
It's not?
No, it's not cooking.
I heard a rumour you're going to do One Man and His Dog.
Well, there are lots of rumours. I heard a rumour that I was going to do a wildlife series. Can you just see me camouflaging myself? And here we have the great apes and Clarissa.
You probably end up eating half the buildings you're looking at.
Yes.
Well, whatever you do, I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for being my guest. Clarissa, Dickson, Wright. All right, thank you. Right, now, On to my final guest, who's 1/4 of the Spice Girls, known as Posh Spice. She's also one half of Britain's most famous couple. While her husband hogs the back page, she dominates the front. Welcome, please, Victoria Beckham. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Staggering dress.
It's just a shame I can't walk in it, really. Tottering down the stairs.
Now, 3 questions I've got to ask you.
Okay.
Right. Is it true that David wears your knickers? First question. Second, is it true that you wear the trousers in your house? And the third, are you anorexic? Now, those are the 3 questions that everybody in the audience out there and the media are all eager to hear your views on. David wearing your knickers to start with.
Well, I'm the only person that actually wears my knickers.
You are.
But if you'd like to borrow them, I can see the headlines now. Parky borrows Posh's knickers.
That'd be nice,
That'd be
all right.
quite good.
But it was a joke.
It was a joke.
That went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem that I have a lot of the time. You know, I do open my mouth and I do say things, and a lot of the time it's completely taken out of context. I mean, as if he'd wear my knickers, come on.
Wouldn't fit.
They wouldn't fit.
It'd be a worry if they were a tight fit, wouldn't it?
Does David actually, I mean, when you come home, when you get home at night, when David comes home, does he say, what have you said today?
Yes,
does
he does.
Have you dropped me in it again?
Yes, he does.
He does it.
Yeah, so I've got to be very careful.
All right, okay. Now, the business about you dominating him in the house, in the sense of being, you wearing the trousers, you're the bossy one. Is that right too?
No, I mean, David's a very, very strong character. I think a lot of people think that he's not, just because, you know, he doesn't do a lot of interviews, you know, he doesn't, even when he does, you know, he doesn't speak up a lot of the time, and I'm the one with a big mouth, so a lot of people think that I do, but he's a very strong character, and he would never, ever do anything that he didn't want to do, or wear anything he didn't want to wear. You know, I mean, the skirts and the, you know, the headgear and everything, none of that has actually been my idea. I'd like to take the credit for it, but it wasn't.
No, it's having fun, for God's sake. I mean, because he's a footballer and it's this macho world of football. I mean, you dress like that, then there's something untoward and wrong. Yeah. But as far as you're concerned, this thing in the press about you, an anorexia. Now, are you anorexic?
No, I'm not.
How do you know that?
I know that because I eat. Anorexics don't eat.
You eat regularly?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a perfectly healthy diet. And what upset me mostly when all of that was actually in the press is that, you know I'm fine. My family know that I'm fine, but there are lots of young children out there who look up to the Spice Girls, you know, and think, goodness, you know, are you meant to be thin? You know, I mean, I look the way that I look now. I used to be a lot bigger, and I lost a lot of weight after having Brooklyn, but this is just the way that I look now. And I mean, it did worry me.
I mean, did you go to a doctor? Do you think you might be anorexic?
No. I did go to the doctors because it worried me, because I started to get paranoid. So I went to the doctors and I said, look, is there anything wrong with me? You know, I wanted to be totally checked out because I was eating perfectly fine, exactly, you know, as I always have done. And I was losing weight. And they just said that's just something that happens, you know, when you have children. My mum lost 3.5 stone after she had my brother. So it's hereditary.
Do you feel now you want to put some weight on?
I think that I could probably do with putting on weight, but I just eat what I eat, and this is the way I am.
Don't forget Clarissa to actually give you a diet, to give you a diet sheet.
What do you eat?
What do I? I have breakfast, then I have a lunch, and then I have dinner, and I snack in between.
Oh, that sounds all right.
Pretty normal.
How many lettuce leaves?
No.
But do you feel that when you go out now, say to a restaurant, that you're being looked at, you're being inspected in a sense for what you eat?
Yeah, I mean, that is quite embarrassing. I was out at dinner the other night and I'm sitting there and I ordered a bowl of pasta or something like that, and the man said, would you like a large bowl or a small bowl? You just feel such an idiot. I've just got used to it now. I don't care what anybody says.
I suppose every time you go to the loo as well, they think you're going to chuck up or whatever.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing. You know, we were out at dinner the other day, and I was absolutely busting for the toilet. And it's quite sad to think that you can't even go to the toilet, because if you do, people are going to think you're throwing up.
Well, what about the public reaction to you? Because there's a lovely story in research about you going into Boots to buy a car seat for the baby.
Yeah. What happened is I needed to get a new car seat for Brooklyn. and he had to weigh like 21 pounds or something before he could sit in this car seat. So I went into Boots and I had no idea how much he weighed. And there were no baby scales around, so I stood on these scales and I'd see how much I weighed, then I'd get off and then get back on with Brooklyn, so I knew if he was heavy enough for this car seat. And as I'm standing on the scales, there's all these people walking past saying, oh, I hope you're putting on a bit of weight there. I hope you're eating. How much do you weigh? And you get a little receipt thing as well when you get off. And at first I didn't realise, and I walked away. My mum said, you better get that, or that will be in the
news.
Oh, it would have been, yeah.
Just imagine.
It's a very good way of weighing things. I do that with my Christmas hams.
Not Boots the chemist, sure.
No, on the pier. We speak your weight.
But what about, I mean, it is extraordinary. I mean, all of us here, are known by the public, but you've got this extraordinary kind of fame, which has people camped outside your house and going through your dustbins. In your case, 2 dustbins.
Yeah.
I mean, how inhibiting is it? How worrying is it for you? I mean, what do you feel about it?
I think that it's a lot more worrying when, obviously because I've got a baby, because I am, because there's been a lot of stuff in the press about, people wanting to kidnap Brooklyn as well.
Was that serious? I mean,
yeah, that was serious.
It was.
I did have threats.
You
And
did.
I mean, the police were fantastic, and, Brooklyn has a bodyguard with him now. But it is something that's really worrying. That's every parent's worst nightmare, something happening to their child. So that's scary. But it does, that was what really freaked me out, I think, about the whole weight issue. It wasn't actually the weight issue in the end. It was just the fact that in the past, if I'd been in the press, I'd been with the Spice Girls or I'd been with David. And for the first time, it was just me. I was completely singled out. And I think it was the whole attention, just the fact that people were that interested in me that kind of freaked me out more than anything, really.
I mean, it gives some idea of distorted sense of news values. The fact that you had a baby took the war and the conflict in the Balkans off the front page, and it was the lead news on the TV. So, I mean, there's a strange sort of perverted logic at work here, isn't there? I mean, it's quite dangerous too, because there are obsessive people out there. Yeah.
It's it is really worrying, and it is really strange, and I'm one of these people that, I go home at night and I put on my pyjamas and I sit in front of the telly with my mum and dad and David, and I never think, so you don't actually realise quite how interested people
Victoria,
are.
you say that, and yet you see there'll be a lot of people out there watching who would say, well, that's not really true, because we see them in the newspapers, we see them out glamorous, all poshed up. We see this couple who invited this magazine in to their wedding and took £1 million for it or wherever it might be. So in a sense, they would say they're inviting that kind of scrutiny.
Yeah. Whenever, so I go out, if we go out for dinner or if we go to a club, you have to continue with your life. Yes, there's going to be photographers, but you can't hide away completely. We don't ask to be in the newspapers. I get photographed if I go to Tesco's or Marks and Spencer's or anywhere like that. It's not just going places where you're going to get photographed. And talking about the magazine getting paid for, for my wedding.
People say you did ask for them to go to your wedding, so therefore you booked the publicity, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That was my next question. If we asked everybody out there, if you got offered a lot of money for pictures that were going to be in the press anyway, if they weren't in OK Magazine, they'd have been in all the newspapers, they'd have been in another magazine, then who out there wouldn't have accepted the money and said, thank you, nice pictures that I can control? I think everybody out there would do it. I'd have been daft, come on.
Totally daft, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It'd be worth getting married for, is somebody often
The baby changed everything in your life in more ways, because, I mean, apart from the fact you had a baby for the first time, it also was that moment in time when the focus of the press did come in on you, didn't it? You started off by wanting to be famous. That was your ambition. You wanted to make a name for yourself. Looking at what you've got at this kind of fame, are you glad you had that ambition? Is this what you expected? Is this what you wanted?
I always wanted to be famous, and I am the luckiest girl in the world. But I'd say that it's got to a stage now where it's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond everything that I ever expected. I mean, every day, literally, you pick up a newspaper and there's either me and David or me or David in the newspaper. and it has gone beyond just being famous. It's almost like a joke.
I don't suppose you
really.
could have imagined being as famous as you became. I mean, there's fame and fame, isn't there? But you are sort of world famous, I suppose. So I mean, it is a level which. But I mean, you can sort of not read the newspapers. That's the only thing I think you can do to sort of is actually not read them, so it doesn't impinge on your consciousness. So if somebody says you're on the front page of the Daily Mirror, it's hard to do. It's very difficult. But if you don't actually see it, then it lessens its effect. It's very difficult to do, but I think that's about the only thing you can do.
I think so, but then also, the media controls what everybody thinks, okay? People pick up a newspaper, they read something, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to believe it. So I'd like to be aware of what people, what people are thinking.
There was a guy that, I better not mention his name, there was a guy that we haven't good news for you, Elvis Costello.
Oh, right.
But, no, it's not a bad story. It's not a bad story about him particularly. But he said I think he just separated from his wife or something, and he was with his wife now or whatever, his girlfriend at the time. And he was on this train coming back from Liverpool where he was born, and he saw it was in the Daily Mirror. It was page 2 of the Daily Mirror, and he saw this woman get on opposite the train, and he thought, well, she's going to turn to page 2. She's going to look at me. It's going to be really embarrassing. What are we going to do? She got the Daily Mirror. She went like that. She went like that. She went like that. She got to the horoscopes and started reading them, and she didn't even notice.
Yes.
So I mean, to you, it's a big story because it's you on the front page, but not necessarily to everybody else.
Yeah, but you see,
But it's difficult to know because you're not.
Sure. But there is the other problem too. I mean, how do you ignore photographers hanging outside your house?
Oh,
how do you ignore people following you wherever you go?
Yeah, that's
I mean, this is another dimension to it.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think, it's all very well saying, well, that's the way it is, but it didn't ought to be that way.
No, it's. I mean, that's
my view.
That's my input. That's the worst thing. I think people outside your house.
Yeah.
I think, it is very difficult, and, we all pick up newspapers and see horrible story about us and think, and hate the people that have written that. But at the end of the day, when I first started out with the Spice Girls, I needed the media as much as, I don't know, now they use me. It's like you scrub my back and I'll scrub yours in a way. As much as it's a pain in the neck, you do...
So in a sense...
Yeah, it's a quid pro quo.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a fair trade-off, you reckon? Because I was going to ask you, would there be, given what you said before, would there be conceivably a point where in the future you and David might say, we've had enough of this, I don't know where you might go, the moon perhaps, or Mars, but, we're going to get out of this.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that?
I've often thought it would be nice to go somewhere where we were left alone a bit, yeah. That has crossed my mind.
I'm sure.
But I better not say that.
Well, it'll have to be the headlines that you're leaving the country tomorrow in the paper, that's right.
But at the moment, I'm very close to my family, and I couldn't leave my family, and David's very happy where he is.
Yes.
So I thought I'd clear that up.
Yeah, better add that quick.
Yeah. Are Manchester United officials, the manager, Mr. Ferguson, is he a fan of yours?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Are you a fan of his?
I think he's very good at his job.
He's
very good at his job. I don't really know him. He's very professional, and he does his job. But when there's social events and things like that, he doesn't ever.
You've not really got involved in the world of football, have you? As
no.
such? Is that because you don't want to, or because you think it's better that you leave David alone up there?
Until I met David, it never interested me at all. I kind of know a bit what's going on now just because of him, but I don't find it very interesting. Really.
Boring?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's yes, I would agree with that. Does David know you think it's boring?
Yeah, he does. But it's okay because, myself and Brooklyn, we both go to the games and we sit in the creche and play with toys while Daddy's playing on the television.
The other thing too, of course, again, which is different about your situation, and you've had a bit of this actually, Paul, when you were married to Caroline, is that you have, when two of you are famous, you get the double bubble, don't you?
Yeah.
There are two dustbins to go through, aren't there?
Yeah.
And that's...
It makes it far more interesting a story. I don't know why.
Yes.
But it's two people together,
Yes. It must put a strain on a relationship, though.
Yeah, I should imagine it would.
Don't you dead that me. He's doing Victoria Beckham on me.
Do I do
They
that?
really go through your dustbins.
No, probably. I don't know. They sort of do, though. I mean, there's a guy that's been arrested for going through private eyes dustbins.
That's
and all
right.
Sort of
Yes,
stuff.
it-
You know,
I wish somebody goes through my dustbins. They get a horrible shock.
So generally speaking, you're able to look at what's happening to you and be fairly philosophical about it, aren't you?
I just think it's really bizarre. You know, if you think about it, I'm the only Spice Girl that up until now, I haven't had a single out, I haven't had an album out, I haven't had a book. You know, all I've done is a documentary that I thought nobody was going to watch. That's all I've had, and yet every single day, virtually, I've been in the newspaper. And for why? I haven't done anything particularly interesting. So
I think it's the marriages. You'll have to get the others to marry other famous people.
Yeah. You're meant to say it just because you're really interesting. That wasn't the answer we wanted.
The thought never occurred to me.
It's probably because you haven't done all these things, you see, so you're not trying.
Yeah,
People
they're
love it if you're
waiting for
not
it.
trying.
Yeah.
You see. They're passionate to know what you've got up your sleeve.
Yeah.
Would you like to be like Clarissa, you know, in sort of large and comfortable and happy with your life, you know, contented? I'm not saying it's a precondition of being happy, but she seems to me as being somebody who's very happy in her own skin, so to speak.
You know what I think? I think when you've got children or you've got a family that you love so much around you, I think the last thing that any sane person would ever do is put their health at risk. So as long as you're happy and you're healthy, that really is all that matters. I mean, being on the front pages of newspapers and magazines and singing songs and everything is fantastic. But it's not going to last forever. What is going to last forever, hopefully, is your family. So whether you're big, small, whatever,
yes.
as long as you're healthy,
yes.
that's all that matters.
I hope you're not suggesting that I'm not healthy.
No. I'm saying it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
as long as
I
you
agree
are, you know, the last thing you want to do is put yourself at risk, isn't it?
Yes.
That's what made it hard for me as well.
Yes.
If I'm saying I'm an anorexic, I'm thinking I've got a lovely family and a gorgeous baby boy. The last thing I'd want to do is not be around to see him.
Yes. When you were in Promise, you of course, in that situation, there were people in there with eating disorders, weren't
Oh,
there?
yes. No, I shared a room with a girl who was severely anorexic, poor child, and in fact died. I think she was about 5 or 6 stone when finally they released her from hospital to come into Promise. And she just didn't make it. I mean, a lot of anorexics don't make it. It's a horrendous illness, a horrible disease. And I mean, the awful thing with an eating disorder, with me, you know, I just don't drink. That makes it sound simpler than it is, but I mean, I don't, I don't have to confront myself with the substance that I'm addicted to. But with eating disorders, you know, you have to eat 3 times a day, and it must be a terrible thing.
But I mean, what was it from the people that you knew there? Were there classic sort of symptoms? I mean, what kind of family did they come from?
Well, like any addict, or they came from all sorts of different families.
Yes,
I mean, this particular girl I'm referring to had had a horrendous family background, but there were girls from perfectly ordinary backgrounds, yes. Perfectly happy backgrounds, and I mean most anorexics knew more about nutrition than any nutritionist I've ever met. I mean, they could tell you exactly how much phosphate there was in a lettuce leaf, or how much nitrogen in a beetroot and things like that. It was really quite frightening.
We've been illuminated.
But what's horrible as well is people were actually saying, I am an anorexic. And that is like saying somebody is dying of some hideous, illness. I mean, how can you do that?
It's obviously got you really annoyed.
I was really annoyed because I think there are so many young children that look up to us.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, that is very worrying, yes. Because then people will
Role
read it,
models.
and the children will misunderstand it, and
Yeah.
they'll think, oh, well, that's the way to be famous, I'll become anorexic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About your child, you've been looking for a school.
I have.
It's a bit young to be going to school.
No, do you know,
What?
there's only one place left in his class as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How
A lot
old
of
is he now?
parents, he's nearly a year.
Oh.
A lot of parents,
Who's he going to?
no, it's just, a lot of parents put their names down for school before they actually are even born nowadays.
Are you going to send him to a posh school?
I'm going to send him to a private school in the country.
That means posh.
No, I'm not going to send him to Eton or anywhere like that. But, you know, I'm putting his name down at lots of different schools, you know, up north, down south, because I mean, whoever, you know, who knows where you're
You have to be even-handed, don't you?
I've got to be so bloody diplomatic all the time. It drives me mad.
Because he's looking for a school in Newcastle, then he's going to join Newcastle United.
Yeah, exactly.
Or down here, then he's going to join Spurs.
Exactly,
or,
and
no.
goodness, what would happen if I said that I'm looking for a blooming school in Spain or something?
There's a couple of...
Real Madrid.
Of course.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I know a couple of good schools near Barnsley, and we
Right,
could do
okay.
a decent there.
You get a cheap house there, too.
Good food too. The heartland of foodies, Yorkshire.
That's right. So what about the other business of yourself and your career now? I mean, you did that documentary, but that was a bit of a joke and a laugh, and you enjoyed doing it, fine. But what else? What about acting? Because originally you wanted to be an actress, didn't you?
Yeah, I wanted to be an actress when I actually went to a drama school. And then I left the drama school and I met up with the other girls and became the Spice Girls. So I never continued with the acting. But whilst being in the Spice Girls, I was still taking a lot of acting classes, doing a lot of reading, a lot of scripts. So acting is something that I definitely want to do, you know, films. But I'm also going to be writing an album myself.
Are you?
Yes.
A solo album?
Yes.
Oh, good.
I am.
Huh?
So, I mean, I am in a difficult position to a certain extent. So many people are very cynically sitting there saying, OK, come on then, so show us what you're going to do. So for me, it's got to be the right part.
And what about the Spice Girls? I mean, have they still got legs as such?
Yeah.
As a career? Yeah.
We've half written an album. And, you know, we've all got our own individual projects as well. But then we get together and carry on writing. You know, and so many people are saying, so when's it going to be out?
Well, there's no urgency. I mean, you've all got all the money in the world, haven't you, really? So, I mean, it doesn't actually matter. You ain't going to starve, anything like that.
That's the thing. I mean, people are saying, you know, why isn't the album out? You know, are the
Yes.
Spice Girls finishing?
Yes.
We've got nothing to prove now, you know. The album will be out when the album's out. You know, we're all really good friends. We're all still working together, but we're doing our own solo projects as well.
It's strange you should say that you've got nothing to prove. How old are you? 24, 25?
25.
Yeah, and it's just a strange thing to say that. And I wondered, you know...
I didn't have my first date till I was 24.
But you're a good Catholic boy. Yeah.
First date, a wonderful euphemism. When you're on your first date. When I was 20.
Is that true?
Yeah, so why would I lie about it? It's true, yeah.
He's made up for it since, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Once you discovered what it was for.
Yes.
I mean, your address book.
I'll tell you the other thing, too, that I wanted to check on, a bit of tabloid ease here coming as well. They told, we read, that you had a boob job done.
I haven't had a boob. If I'd have had a boob job, I'd had them done bigger than this.
Yes,
That's all I can say.
Yeah, but that was in the papers, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think when you read that? You saw
Well,
that?
it was quite embarrassing, actually, because I was on holiday, actually, at the time. And someone phoned me, and I hadn't told anybody where I was going. They phoned me and said, oh, I hear you're in Mustique. And I said, well, actually, I'm skiing. They said, it doesn't look like you're skiing. And I'm always really paranoid. You know, I don't like being photographed when I'm on holiday and I'm with my family. And apparently they did like a huge, great big close-up down my cleavage. And said, well, no, I mean, I wasn't. I was, I was sunbathing, but I told everybody that I was somewhere else. A huge, great big close-up down my top and said I had a boob job.
I get death threats, you know.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
You don't.
From vegetarians.
Do?
The best one I had was from chicken's lib. That's perfectly true.
The old country and western singer.
Possibly. It was the most wonderful card of this turkey cock in full wattle. And on the back it had chicken's lib, pledged to protect chickens. So I rang them up. And I said, what wonderful cards. I said, I'd like to buy some. And they said, yes, madam, what's your name? And I said, Clarissa, Dickson, Wright. And there was a sort of pause down the other end of the phone. And I said, well, you see, we're on the same side. I mean, I want chickens to have a good life because they taste so much. I never got the cards. But it's true. It wasn't chicken's lib that sent me the death threat. It was somebody who had their cards.
I think you'll get the headlines tomorrow, not Victoria, actually.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, thank you very much indeed. I much enjoyed that. Victoria Beckham. From all of us here, a very good night. Good night.